Envision a nation forged in revolution, fire its golden fields, and bustling cities swept into the vast machinery of the Soviet Union. Stalin's iron fist crushed autonomy, unleashing famine, war, and relentless Russification. From the Holodomor that starved millions, through WWII's brutal battles, to KGB shadows and Chernobyl's toxic legacy, Ukraine endured. These scars still drive its fight today. Welcome back to Chapter 5 of the Deep Chapter. Sovetskaya epoka навсегда изменила Ukrainu.
Part 1. Setting the stage. Ukraine in the early USSR. Our story opens in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution and the Ukrainian War of Independence, where the Bolsheviks consolidated power over a fractured region. In December 1922, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, Ukrainian SSR, was formally incorporated into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics (USSR) as one of its 4 founding members, alongside the Russian SFSR, Belarusian SSR, and Transcaucasian SFSR. This union was sealed by the Treaty on the Creation of the Soviet Union, signed in Moscow, marking the end of Ukraine's brief flirtation with independence after the fall of the Russian Empire. Ukrainian SSR encompassed most of modern Ukraine, with its capital in Kharkiv until 1934, when it shifted to Kyiv, reflecting the centralization of power under Moscow's oversight. In Joseph Stalin's vision, the Ukrainian SSR was a crucial cog in his centralized Soviet state, a breadbasket and industrial powerhouse to fuel the USSR's ambitions. Stalin, rising to power after Lenin's death in 1924, viewed Ukraine's vast farmlands and mineral resources as essential for his rapid industrialization drive. The Communist Party of Ukraine, a branch of the all-encompassing Communist Party of the Soviet Union, governed under a one-party system, with all decisions funneled through the Kremlin. Early on, the 1920s saw a policy of Koreanization, or indigenization, which included Ukrainization, promoting the Ukrainian language in education, administration, and media, and elevating ethnic Ukrainians to leadership roles to build loyalty to the Soviet project. Newspapers flourished in Ukrainian schools, taught in the native tongue, and cultural institutions celebrated local heritage. But this facade of cultural autonomy crumbled under Stalin's paranoia. By the late 1920s, suppression intensified. Ukrainian intellectuals, writers, scholars, and artists who championed national identity were labeled bourgeois nationalists and purged. The executed Renaissance, as it became known, saw hundreds arrested, exiled, or executed during the Great Purge of 1937–1938, including luminaries like playwright Mykola Kulish and poet Pavla Tykina's contemporaries. The Ukrainian language faced censorship. Its use in official spheres dwindled, replaced by Russian to foster unity. The church suffered gravely. The Ukrainian autocephalous Orthodox Church, independent since 1919, was dissolved in 1930, its bishops imprisoned or killed, while thousands of churches and synagogues were demolished or repurposed as warehouses. Stalin's regime aimed to erase any vestige of separatism, viewing Ukrainian orthodoxy as a threat to atheist Soviet ideology. Amid this repression, rapid industrialization transformed the landscape. The Donbas region, rich in coal and iron, became the USSR's industrial heartland. During the first 5-year plan, 1928 to 1932, factories sprouted across eastern Ukraine. The Dnipro hydroelectric station, the largest in Europe at the time, powered new steel mills in Zaporizhia and chemical plants in Donetsk. Industrial output in the Donbas quintupled within a decade, drawing millions from rural areas into burgeoning cities. Urbanization surged. By the 1930s, Kharkiv's population ballooned from 300,000 to over 800,000, with workers housed in hastily built communal apartments or kommunalki, where families shared kitchens and bathrooms amid propaganda posters extolling socialist progress. Yet this progress came at a human cost, setting the stage for one of history's darkest chapters. Part 2. The Holodomor 1932–33. As Stalin's industrialization demanded ever more resources, Ukraine's peasants bore the brunt. The Holodomor, meaning death by hunger in Ukrainian, unfolded from 1932 to 1933, man-made famine, engineered through forced collectivization. Stalin's first five-year plan mandated the consolidation of individual farms into state-controlled collectives, cold, or kolkhozy, to boost grain production for export and urban feeding. In Ukraine, a key grain-producing region, resistance was fierce. Peasants slaughtered livestock rather than surrender it, destroying nearly half of the USSR's cattle and pigs. In retaliation, authorities imposed exorbitant grain quotas up to 7.7 million tons in 1932, far exceeding harvests crippled by poor weather and inefficiency. Grain requisition squads, often backed by OGPU secret police, scoured villages, confiscating not just grain but seeds, potatoes, and even household food. Despite clear signs of famine-swollen bellies, mass begging exports continued unabated, shipping 1.8 million tons abroad, enough to sustain 5 million people for a year. Borders were sealed on Stalin's orders in January 1933, trapping starving villagers inside Ukraine and the Kuban region, preventing escape to less affected areas like Russia. The law of spikelets criminalized gleaning even a handful of grain, leading to thousands of arrests. Millions perished. Estimates range from 3.5 to 5 million in recent scholarship, though earlier figures reach 7 to 10 million, including unborn children and excess deaths. Ukrainian peasants were especially targeted. Areas with higher Ukrainian populations faced steeper quotas and harsher enforcement, seen by many as an assault on national identity amid the reversal of Ukrainization. Villages were blacklisted, cut off from trade, their inhabitants left to starve. Reports described cannibalism, orphans roaming streets, and mass graves. The demographic scar was profound. Ukraine's population grew only 6.6% from 1926 to 1939 versus 16.9% in the USSR overall, with ethnic Ukrainians declining by 10%. The trauma endures as a cornerstone of Ukrainian memory. Commemorated annually on the fourth Saturday of November since 1998, with memorials like Kyiv's National Museum of the Holodomor genocide. Opened in 2008, Ukraine recognized it as genocide in 2006, joined by 33 UN states, the European Parliament, and 35 US states. Russia disputes this, viewing it as a shared Soviet tragedy or unintended consequence, not deliberate ethnic targeting, a divide that sharpens modern tensions. With Ukraine seeing parallels in Russia's 2022 invasion tactics like blockading grain exports. Part 3. World War II in Ukraine, 1941 to 1945, barely recovering from famine. Ukraine plunged into the abyss of World War II on June 22, 1941. Nazi Germany's Operation Barbarossa unleashed 3 million troops across the Soviet border, with Ukraine as a prime target for its resources and Lebensraum ideology. The front lines carved through Ukrainian soil, making it a central battlefield. The Battle of Kyiv in September 1941 encircled and captured over 600,000 Red Army soldiers in one of history's largest encirclements. Kyiv fell after 83 days of resistance, earning hero city status posthumously. German occupation was savage. Most of Ukraine became the Reichskommissariat Ukraine under Erich Koch, who exploited it ruthlessly, preserving collectives to extract grain while deporting 2.2 million Ostarbeiter to German factories. Brutality peaked in mass killings at Babi Yar Ravine near Kyiv. Einsatzgruppen death squads murdered 33,771 Jews in 2 days in September 1941. Part of an estimated 1.5 million Jewish deaths in Ukraine, often with local collaborators. Roma communists and POS faced similar fates. Over 3 million Soviet prisoners died in camps. Ukrainian loyalties fractured. Between 4.5 and 7 million ethnic Ukrainians served in the Red Army, suffering 1.4 million deaths, while up to 500,000 joined Soviet partisans by 1944, harassing German supply lines. In western Ukraine, annexed from Poland in 1939, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, under Stepan Bandera, sought independence. The OUNB faction proclaimed a state in Lviv in June 1941, but Nazis arrested Bandera, holding him until 1944. The Ukrainian Insurgent Army UPA, formed in 1942, fought Germans, Soviets, and Poles. Infamous, the war's toll was cataclysmic. Over 700 cities and 28,000 villages razed, 19 million homeless, total deaths around 6 million, 16 to 20% of Ukraine's population. Cities like Kharkiv changed hands 4 times, reduced to rubble. Cultural treasures from museums to monasteries were looted or destroyed. Liberation came gradually. Eastern Ukraine by 1943, Western by 1944 to 1945, but at the cost of another famine in 1946, 1947, killing tens of thousands. Part 4. War with the Ottoman Empire. The First Russo-Turkish War erupted on October 6, 1768. When Sultan Mustafa III declared war, citing Russian interference in Polish affairs amid the Bar Confederation uprising, Russia, under generals like Pyotr Rumyantsev and Alexander Suvorov, dominated. In 1769, Rumyantsev captured Kotin after a 10-week siege, opening the Danube. 1770 saw decisive land victories. At Ryabaya Mogila, June 17th, 23,000 Russians routed 80,000 Ottomans and Tatars. Larga July 7th killed 1,000 Ottomans with minimal Russian losses. Larga July 21st saw 17,000 Russians defeat 150,000, inflicting 20,000 casualties using innovative square formations and artillery. Naval triumphs stunned Europe. The Russian Baltic Fleet, commanded by Alexei Orlov, circumnavigated to the Mediterranean. At Chios Strait, July 5th to 7th, 1770, they engaged. Then at Chesim Bay, July 5th to 7th, used fire ships to incinerate the Ottoman fleet 15 battleships. 6 frigates destroyed over 11,000 Ottoman dead. This marked Russia's naval emergence. By 1771, Crimea was occupied, with Prussian Khan Sahib Tajiri installed. The war continued with Russian advances to the Danube, capturing Bucharest and Bender, despite Ottoman counteroffensives, hampered by plague. Peace came with the Treaty of Kuka-Kanarka on July 21, 1774. Russia gained Kerch, Yanakali, Kinburn, and Azov. Free navigation on the Black Sea, the right to protect Orthodox Christians in Ottoman domains, a clause enabling future interventions. Crimea was declared independent, but Russia influenced its conselection. Installing Kahingire in 1777, Catherine's diplomacy shone. She allied with Prussia and Austria for the first partition of Poland in 1772, gaining Belarusian lands without provoking a broader war. Part 5. Annexation of Crimea. By 1783, instability in Crimea provided pretext. Kahingire's westernizing reform taxes. A standing army sparked Tatar revolts in 1781 to 1782, suppressed with Russian aid. On April 8, 1783, Catherine issued a manifesto annexing Crimea, citing protection of Christians and historical rights, with troops under Potemkin occupying peacefully. The Ottomans, exhausted, recognized it in the 1784 Annalikovac Convention. This triumph made Russia a Black Sea power. Sevastopol was founded on June 3, 1783, as a naval fortress with shipyards and docks built rapidly. By 1790, it housed the Black Sea Fleet. For Crimean Tatars, it was catastrophic. Mass emigration began, with 100,000 to 300,000 fleeing to Ottoman lands by 1800, facing hardships en route. Lands were confiscated, mosques converted, and resistance quashed. The slave trade ended, but at the cost of autonomy. In Russian lore, Crimea became Taurida, a mythic paradise. Catherine's 1787 tour with Potemkin showcased staged prosperity, inspiring poets like Gavril Durzhaven to hail it as imperial glory. Part 6. Daily life in imperial integration. Colonization accelerated post-annexation. Catherine invited settlers with incentives, Russians and Ukrainians from central provinces, Greeks and Armenians from Ottoman lands, Germans from the Volga. By 1795, over 60,000 newcomers arrived, granted land and tax breaks. Tatars, once 90% of the population, fell to under 50% by the mid-19th century. Agriculture flourished. Wheat exports boomed via Odessa. Vineyards expanded in Yalta and silk production started with mulberry plantations. New cities like Simferopol 1784 became administrative hubs. Roads and ports linked to the mainland. Daily life varied. Russian settlers farmed communal lands, building wooden izbas and Orthodox churches. Ukrainians brought traditions like embroidered shirts and folk songs, working vineyards. Greeks and Armenians established trading communities in Feodosia, preserving languages and crafts. Tatars, marginalized, herded sheep in the mountains. Their yurt villages shrinking as lands were redistributed to nobles. Cultural shifts included building palaces like the Khans in Bakhchazari repurposed, and fortresses dotting the coast. By the 1790s, Crimea was integrated, but at the expense of indigenous ways. Part 7. Legacy and Modern Relevance. Catherine's 1783 annexation forged Russian imperial identity, portraying Crimea as a reclaimed jewel symbolizing destiny and Orthodox triumph. For Ukrainians, it eroded autonomy. Cossack freedoms vanished with the sickest destruction, folding Ukraine into the Little Russia Governorate. Crimean Tatars endured exile. Post-1783 emigrations, 1850s Crimean War displacements, and Stalin's 1944 deportation of 194,000 to Central Asia. With 46% mortality from starvation and disease, returns began in 1989, but trauma lingered. This legacy links to modern events. In 1954, Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea to the Ukrainian SSR for administrative reasons. After Ukraine's 1991 independence, Crimea became an autonomous republic. Putin's 2014 annexation followed the Euromaidan Revolution. Little green men seized buildings. A March 16 referendum, disputed as coerced, claimed 97% support for joining Russia. Internationally condemned as illegal under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, it sparked sanctions and conflict. By 2025, amid Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine since 2022, Crimea remains occupied, a military hub for attacks. Tatars face repression arrests of over 200 activists, cultural erasure, and forced conscription. Ukrainian counteroffensives like 2023 strikes on Sevastopol highlight ongoing resistance, echoing Catherine's conquest in today's hybrid warfare. Catherine's era birthed an imperial Russia modern, enlightened in aspiration, yet conquest-driven. Crimea was more than territory. It was a gateway, a symbol fought over eternally. Next, the Napoleonic upheavals and 19th century imperial strains.
Ukraine's Soviet chapter forged a people through famine, war, and ideological chains from the Holodomor to Chernobyl, building a resolve that defies erasure. These legacies deny linguistic divides, heroic debates, fuel distrust of Moscow in the 2022-2025 war. In the next chapter, we'll be diving into the collapse of the USSR and Ukraine's journey to independence. This has been The Deep Chapter. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. See you in the next chapter. Do svidaniya.